Well, good evening, friends. Keep that passage open in front of you. It'll be great if we can refer to it as we go through. It's a very, very challenging section, isn't it? Don't worry, says God. Why are you worrying? Don't worry. And what a challenge to us, especially if you are, like me, a warrior. We're busy listening to Jesus as he teaches his disciples about the kingdom of God and about the Father that he has just introduced them to in the Lord's Prayer. Do you remember? Pray like this, he says. Don't call God, God. Call him Father. Pray to him as you would speak to a father. And this section, together with the last one, remember all about money and building up, storing up treasures in heaven, they flow directly out of the Lord's Prayer that Richard helped us to understand earlier in the chapter. We saw last week that money poses a huge threat to God's family. You cannot serve both God and money, Jesus says. They are opposites. They are opposite forces, both demanding your allegiance. And so be very careful with it. Money poses a huge threat. We can become so preoccupied with it. We accumulate large amounts of it. We believe its promises that it will bring us comfort and security and pleasure. We judge our self-worth by it, all the while forgetting that we have a Father in heaven who we should be preoccupied with. A Father who promises us real comfort, real security, real pleasure. And he gives us our self-worth by adopting us into his family as his own children. So we quickly look to money to give us the things that we should be looking to our Father in heaven for. And surprisingly, we saw that Jesus' answer to the dangers of money is not to become anti-wealth, but to become more preoccupied with accumulating wealth. But storing up for ourselves treasure, yes, but treasure in heaven. Give your lives to storing up real wealth, says Jesus, wealth that will last. Remember, we saw the rust, moth, and thief test last week. Store up for yourselves money that will survive that. He said as well that your heart will follow wherever you put your treasure. Wherever your treasure is, your heart will go in that direction. So put your treasure in heaven, then your heart will be safe. There's a story about a stingy Scotsman who went to church and accidentally put in a £100 note into the collection bag instead of the £1 that he intended to put in. When he saw his mistake, he went to the deacon to ask for his money back, and the deacon refused. And so the Scotsman shrugged his shoulders and said, "Oh, well, I'll get credit for it in heaven." "No, you won't," said the deacon. "You're going to get credit for £1. Jesus says, don't be like that Scotsman, thinking that £1 should keep God off your back for another week, and then patting yourself on the back when you give more by mistake. No, he says, store up for yourself real treasure in heaven. Invest your time, your energy, your money in God's plan to tell the world what he has done for them in Jesus. Invest in gospel ministry. That was the message from last week, and I left you all hanging. Did you know that I'm a mind reader? I know exactly what you're thinking at this point, or at least Jesus knew what you would be thinking at this point. That's how I know. That's all very well you're thinking, aren't you? Supporting gospel ministry, storing up for myself wealth in heaven, giving everything away. But what about my responsibility for providing for life here on earth? If I give everything towards gospel ministry, who's going to provide for my family? The university bills, the medical bills, the provision for my old age, the generous estate to leave to help my children. Isn't all this talk about giving generously and sacrificially to the gospel, isn't it irresponsible? Hasn't God given me the responsibility to supply my family with food and drink and clothing? Well, has he? Has God given you that responsibility of providing your family with food and drink and clothing? Wherever did you get that thought from, says Jesus? Listen to what Jesus says again. Do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, what shall we drink, what shall we wear? For pagans run after those things. Don't seek after those things, says Jesus. You have a Father in heaven who knows that you need those things. Providing those things for you are his responsibility, not yours. But you do have a responsibility, says Jesus, but it's not for those things. Your responsibility is to seek something else. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Not earned by you, given to you, says Jesus. But doesn't the Bible say that God helps those who help themselves? No, it actually doesn't. That was what Algernon Sidney said in the 1600s, and it's been quoted ever since as though it's in the Bible. Did you know this, that the Quran actually says that? The Quran says God helps those who help themselves, not the Bible. In fact, listen to what the Bible does say about helping yourself and trusting in yourself. Proverbs 28:26 says, "He who trusts in himself is a fool." Jeremiah 17:5 says, "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who depends on flesh for his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord." So Christian parents don't expect their children to run around the neighborhood foraging for food and clothing, do they? And yet the very same Christian parents say things like, "I can't give generously and sacrificially to my Father's kingdom because my Father expects me to forage for my food and my drink and my clothing." Isn't it ironic? Do we think that God is a worse father than we are? We don't send our kids out, but we think he's sending us out to do the same thing. You see, friends, Christians are God's children. Remember that in the Lord's Prayer. "Give us today our daily bread," we ask our Father. "Provide what we need," we pray to our Father. And on either side of that request to give us what we need, Jesus says this exactly the same thing. "Do not be like a pagan, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." Verse 32, "The pagans run after these things, food, drink, and clothing. Your heavenly Father knows that you need them." It's his responsibility as a father to give those that he has created and adopted. It's his responsibility to provide those things. So friends, let's be very careful that we don't confess God as our Father with our lips and then behave like the pagans who have no relationship with God as their Father at all. Now, the two best ways I know to show that you really do believe that God is your Father and that he is trustworthy as a Father is firstly to pray. The Lord's Prayer. Children, real children of God, pray. Because prayer is a demonstration of your reliance on your Father. But secondly, the second way to show that you trust in God is to give sacrificially. That's what we saw last week. You're saying that you believe that your Father really does know what you need when you give sacrificially, that he really will provide for you and your family, as any good human father would. Now, as I said, the minute Jesus starts talking about this business of storing up treasures in heaven instead of on earth, he anticipates our anxiety and our doubts and our concerns. And so the very next 10 verses, following his command to give sacrificially to the gospel, he dedicates the next 10 verses to talking about anxiety, assuring us that we can trust our Father in heaven, who we are investing in. He knows what we need. He will provide what you need. So just as the lure of money can draw us away from the family of our Father, so the fear and anxiety of poverty can do just the same. So the first point we just want to draw out of our passage tonight, Jesus says, don't seek stress in your life. Don't seek stress. He talks about money last week, food, clothing and drink this week. Do you realize just how many TV adverts are about those things? Money, which bank to bank with, how to invest your money. Food, what food you should buy, KFC, Wimpy. Clothing, all the adverts on TV and in the newspapers on clothing. And drink. The very things God has promised for us is what this world is preoccupied, obsessed with. We worry about these things as if our lives depend on them, as if God has turned us out to go and find them for ourselves. Even if we have plenty of those things, we still worry about those things. Am I right? Am I eating the right food? More eggs, more salt, less salt, more sugar, less sugar. Am I drinking enough water? Should I drink vitamin-enriched water or not? Is it okay to be seen in last year's fashions? What if someone turns up at the same party with the same clothes as I've got on? Being rich doesn't mean you don't worry about these things. It's just that your worries are different than the poor person. But the worries are about exactly the same things. You see, wealth and poverty aren't opposites and opposite dangers to splitting up God's family. They're the same. Jesus links the two together. They pose equal threats to drawing you away from God. In verse 24, the warrior is worried about losing all the wealth that they've got. But in verse 25, the warrior is worried about the wealth that they don't have. But both parties worry, and both parties are in danger of not trusting their Father. So Jesus says to the rich and he says to the poor, choose which master you're going to serve. If you decide to choose my Father as your master, then whether you're rich or poor, you don't need to be anxious about money matters, because my Father's got that area covered. Just as any good father, his job is to provide what you need in life. That's not your job. And Jesus says we will face many troubles in this life because we live in a troubled world, but anxiety is not the answer to facing trouble. Look at verse 34. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Jesus is realistic about this. He knows we are going to face troubles. He knows we're going to face huge financial burdens in this life. But he says, worrying isn't going to help when you face those concerns. He goes on in verse 27, he says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? Do you really think, says Jesus, that you can improve your situation by worrying? You're wasting your time worrying, he says. And let me prove it to you. Let me prove it to you. Think about something that's been causing you anxiety recently. What is it that's been worrying you over the last couple of weeks? Got it in your mind? Ready? Now on the count of 3, worry as much as possible about that thing. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Are you worrying? Worry really hard. Okay, stop. How many of you have added 1 hour to your life by doing that? How has worrying helped you? Do you think you can add 1 hour to your life by worrying? Jesus says worrying is completely futile. It doesn't help one little bit. It cannot make your troubles go away. So listen to Jesus' words again. Verse 25, your life is more important than food. Your body is more important than clothes. So don't be anxious. Verse 27, you cannot add a single hour to your life by worrying. I think we just proved that. So don't be anxious. Verse 34, you don't know what tomorrow will bring, so don't be anxious about tomorrow. Just trust your Father. Trust him for today and let tomorrow worry about itself. Of course, the Gentiles, the pagans, the irreligious, well, they're right to worry, actually. And they look to all sorts of things to give them security. They don't have the security of an eternal family or a home in heaven. They don't have a Father who knows about the future, who owns all the wealth in the universe, and who loves them as their children. They've got grounds to worry. But Christian, what is your excuse for worrying, says Jesus. Our church in Durban partnered with an organization called iCare. iCare look after the street kids in the city of Durban. Street kids are the runaway kids or the kids that have been thrown out of their homes. They're very, very vulnerable. You see them at the robots in Durban a lot, begging, usually high on glue and other drugs. They're terribly abused, terribly exploited. They live with terrible fear and stress because why? They don't have parents. They are out on the streets by themselves. They don't have someone who loves them, who cares for them, who protects and who provides for them. Friends, here's the point. Stop living like a street kid. You're not a street kid, says Jesus. You have got a Father in heaven who loves you and who provides for you. Let him worry about the future because he knows what the future is. You don't. That's the parents' job, to shield their children from the stresses and the dangers and the worries of this world, and God is your Father. Friends, are you perhaps living like a street kid in this world, scared of what the future might bring, scared to be carefree, scared to be generous and free with what the Father has given you, living with terrible stress in your life over the future? Well, I can only think of 2 reasons why you might be living as a street kid. Maybe you are. Maybe you don't have a Father in heaven. And maybe you've come here tonight and you don't know God as your Father. When you pray, you speak to God, whoever that may be, but you don't know who he is. You don't call him Father. You're not trusting him for your salvation and for the future. You don't have a home waiting for you in heaven. Well, friends, in that case, God is saying, come home. I want to be your Father. Come home. Come to me. Or the other reason you might be living as a street kid is that you are a Christian, but you simply don't trust your Father. You think he's not trustworthy to provide what you need. And so you run around the streets foraging for yourself. In which case, let me ask you, in all of history, when did God ever let his children down? Imagine how offended you would be if your kids went out and lived as street kids on the corner, begging because they're not sure if there's food at home when they get back, begging for clothes because they're not sure if mom and dad love them enough to give them what they need. So maybe our problem tonight is that we don't trust God because we don't know him well enough. We're not sure if he is a good father or not. Well, friends, can I urge you to get to know him? Do that by reading his word that he's given us about himself. Get stuck into the Bible. Go join a Bible study is the best way, actually. Get to know your Father before you decide you can't be trusted. That's just not fair. Jesus says, don't seek stress. Don't go out there looking for stress. And don't seek stress because your Heavenly Father knows what you need. He says in verse 32, the pagans run after these things, the things we need. Your Heavenly Father knows that you need them. Everything you worry about, your Father already knows about, says Jesus. He's never caught off guard or caught by surprise that you need something. Jesus in this section is asking if you think that your Father is any good at being a father. Is he fit to be your dad? Can he meet the needs of his children? If you had to sit God down and get him to write a father's exam, what sort of mark do you think he would get? And Jesus gives us two illustrations here to help us think about whether God is a good father or not. The first one is about birds. Look at the birds of the air, he says in verse 26. They do not sow or the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Well, it's not that Jesus is saying that birds never die of thirst, or that birds never die of starvation, or that birds never freeze to death. They do. He's saying that God has been feeding birds for thousands, no, millions possibly, of years. He's not saying that we must just sit around in the nest with our mouths open and expect God to drop the worm in, but he is saying that God has had experience with feeding birds. Trillions and trillions and trillions of them since the beginning of time. Do you think that the creator God of the universe knows anything about nutrition and the dietary needs of his creatures? Of course he does. If those stupid fat hardy-dards who wake us up every morning live such comfortable lives, do you think that you, the precious, loved child of God, will be looked after in the same way? If the farmer goes to so much trouble to wake up early and give his chickens enough food and water for the day, well, do you think your Father can be trusted to feed you? Put another way, do you think God loves you any less than Robert loves his chickens? Robert loves his chickens, but they're just chickens. Do you not think that you're loved more by God than Robert loves his chickens? Of course you are. And so verse 31, so do not worry, says Jesus. How many times does he have to say that in this passage? Saying, what will you eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? Panicking, as if our Father doesn't know we need those things. The other illustration is in verse 28, and this one, ladies, is for you. It's about fashion. Jesus says in verse 28, and why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow, yet they do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, well, will he not much more clothe you? Jesus is saying that even though lilies don't know how to weave or spin or sew, yet the fields are beautifully clothed with lilies. Or he brings in Solomon, the richest man of Israelite history. He spent an absolute fortune on clothes to look good, but he didn't even get close to looking as beautiful as a single flower. But as verse 30 says, even though plants are so beautiful, they actually don't do anything. They grow, they look pretty, then they die, thrown into the fire. Flower arrangements are beautiful, but when the petals start dropping, we don't go into mourning. We just turf them out and pick some new ones. You see, what Jesus is saying, God has had years of experience of dressing the fields with beautiful clothes. He knows how to give his fields a decent set of threads. God has been designing and dressing his fields since the world began, and his designs knock the socks off Solomon, says Jesus. Thinking that God is not going to clothe you is like thinking that, I don't know, Pierre Cardin, Christian Dior, Versace, Armani, thinking that those guys don't know how to dress their own children. It's unthinkable that they wouldn't provide clothes for their own children when they clothe the most beautiful woman on the planet. Just what kind of father do you think God is, says Jesus? Does he care more about lilies and daffodils than he does about you? When God hears you pray, give our family this day what we need, do you think God is going to mock that prayer? The pagan who doesn't know these things about God has every right to be anxious about tomorrow. But what reason do you have, says Jesus, for doubting God's abilities as a father? And he ends in verse 30 with these words, O you of little faith, O you of little faith. In other words, do you realize, do you trust, do you believe that you've got a Father in heaven, or don't you? Let your life reflect what you believe about God. If you believe you've got a Father in heaven, let your life reflect that faith. If you don't believe that you've got a Father in heaven, well, get out there and start foraging for your own food. You're not a street kid, says Jesus to his disciples. Do you believe that your Father can be trusted? You don't have to live as a street kid because you have a brilliant Father. You can't see him yet, but he's there. He's bursting with love for you. He wants to give you good things. He hates to see you fretting and worrying and being anxious about everything. He's got it covered. He's got it covered. He knows the future. He's got it covered. He can't understand why you won't trust him more. Friends, the word from God to you today is stop worrying. What more, Jesus says, what more must your Father do to show you that you don't need to worry? God has proved, he's demonstrated his love for you on the cross. God has fed trillions of birds over thousands of years. For thousands of years, God has clothed the fields with indescribably beautiful flowers. Do you think he will not clothe you? Why won't you trust me to feed and clothe you for, it's only 70 or 80 years? God can do that with his eyes closed. God is saying, it hurts me to see your irrational anxiety. So friends, how about you revisiting the Lord's Prayer in your life? Pray it. Pray it slowly, pray it carefully. Pray it remembering who you're addressing it to. It is your loving Father in heaven that you're speaking to. Structure your prayers around the Lord's Prayer, as Richard suggested last week. It's a great suggestion. Pray remembering who you're praying to. And the best qualified, most experienced, most loving Father in the universe is the person that you're praying to. Maybe keep note of the things that you're praying so you can say thank you to him afterwards, so that you can build up a track record of God's faithfulness to you. So when the really tough times come, you can look at his track record and face them with no anxiety. God says, I dare you. Try it. Put it to the test, is what God is saying to us tonight. Let God prove himself as a Father. One day we're going to reach the end of this life. One day we won't need to pray anymore, especially not for food, because we will be face to face with our Father in heaven. On that day you will wonder why on earth you worried so much, why you didn't trust him while you were on earth. You will look at God in all his glory and all his brilliance, and you'll think, what was I so worried about? We are going to kick ourselves for not being bolder, more adventurous with storing up treasures in heaven, as though investing in eternity would mean that your Father would give you less and watch you sink into poverty. He will never let that happen. How would that reflect on him as your Father? Well, just lastly, there is something we must do. We must seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. You see, there's nothing wrong, we saw last week, there's nothing wrong with storing up for yourself treasure, just not treasure on earth. And so this week, we see that there is nothing wrong with seeking either. Just don't seek anxiety. That's not what we must seek. Seek first, rather, his kingdom and his righteousness. And all of these things will be given to you as well. So Jesus wants his people to seek. But just don't go seeking what the pagans seek. If you call yourself a Christian, when troubles come, will people see the difference in your reaction to those troubles? Will you get as anxious as the pagans do? Or are you going to seek something through those troubles that the troubles cannot touch? Will you turn your attention, will you keep your attention on your Father, or are you going to turn your attention to the troubles? What you seek is where your heart will go. And so Jesus says, keep your eyes firmly on your Father. Seek his kingdom. Seek his righteousness for your life. And then you won't actually have time for the troubles you're facing. You see, this kingdom of God that he talks about is the perfect future that is going to come for all of us. That will be the day when God's will is done perfectly on earth as it is in heaven. And to enter that kingdom, Jesus has told us that our righteousness needs to be greater than the most religious people on the planet. In fact, Jesus, remember he said, you need to be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. In fact, you need God's righteousness, so seek that. God's kingdom begins with you recognizing that you're poor in spirit, that you need his righteousness, that we are born spiritually bankrupt, that we have nothing to offer God. Remember that old hymn, nothing in my hands I bring, simply to the cross I cling. So the kingdom of God, Jesus says, belongs to the humble, those who know they have no righteousness, those who hunger and thirst for the righteousness they don't have. They are not hungering and thirsting for food and clothing and money and drink. We are not thirsting, we are not pursuing those things. We are pursuing something completely different. We are pursuing God's righteousness and his kingdom. Well, let me wrap up. Friends, how much do you stress about the future? Could it be that you're a street child, you're living in this world, but you actually don't know your Father in heaven? You don't know the God who knows the future, who controls the future. Don't you want to join this family, to enter this kingdom, to know your Father, to know the love and the protection and the provision that he's offering you today? Jesus says, come home. Come today. Ask God to forgive you for living as though he's dead. Ask him to adopt you and make you one of his own. Or maybe you are a Christian. You've come home to your Father years ago, but you've taken your eyes off your Father in recent times. Remember, you're not a street kid. Don't live as though you are, as though God has deserted you, left you to fend for yourself. Go back to your Father. Tell him your troubles. Leave your anxieties with him. That's what you would do, wouldn't it? If you had children who were worried, you'd want them to bring those worries to you as the parent. So do that. Take them to your dad in heaven. Pray the Lord's Prayer. Make it your own. Pray it and believe it, that God will provide your needs. Seek his kingdom. Seek his righteousness, because your Father is brilliant at being a father. Give sacrificially. It's the best protection against the destructive power of money to lure you out of the family. Seek after the things that your Father is precious about, and let your Father take care of the rest. He has promised to do that. Let me finish with verse 34. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has got enough trouble of its own. Isn't that so true? So simple, but so true. You can't control tomorrow. You don't know what troubles lie around the next corner. But what you can control is where you put your trust. If you choose money, well, then this world will be your master. But if you choose Jesus' Father as your master, well, there is only goodness waiting for you. There is only glory waiting for you ahead. You can face today's troubles because you've got the best dad in the whole world standing at your side, watching over you. A dad who loves you, who values you more than you can imagine. What a great comfort that is. Jesus says, let tomorrow worry about itself. You get on with worrying about seeking God's glory, God's kingdom, God's righteousness, and all of these other things that we worry so much about. Well, he will add them to you as well. We've got a great song. We sang it for the first time last week.